Lean in close, because this isn't the story they tell in polite history books. No, this is the tale whispered by old sailors with whiskey on their breath and shadows in their eyes. Picture it, the dawn of November 22nd, 1718. The air off Ocracoke Island was heavy with salt, gunpowder, and something darker, something like fate. Edward Teach, the man the world knew as Blackbeard, stood on the deck of his battered sloop Adventure. His beard, thick and wild, was braided with slow-burning fuses that spat smoke and sparks, making him look less like a man and more like a demon risen from the sea itself. But here's the secret no one dares to say. Aloud, Blackbeard knew this morning was different. He had cheated death too many times, carved his legend in blood across the Caribbean, and made kings tremble from oceans away. But on that mist-laden morning, as the first rays of light pierced the water, he felt the cold hand of inevitability curl around him. The sea was quiet, unnervingly so. His crew shifted nervously, the silence pressing on them like the weight of the ocean itself. Then, out of the fog, shapes appeared low, sleek, and merciless. 2 sloops of the Royal Navy, Jane and Ranger, sent by Governor Alexander Spotswood of Virginia, hunting one man like he was worth more than all the gold in Nassau. Their mission, kill the devil of the seas and Blackbeard. He grinned. The clash that followed wasn't a neat battle, it was a brutal, bloody storm of musket fire, cutlass steel, and shrieking men. The kind of fight where the water itself turns red and the air fills with smoke so thick it strangles you. They say Blackbeard fought like 10 men, bellowing, laughing, cutting through soldiers like they were paper. But here's where the story twists. When the smoke cleared and the legend fell, his body was riddled with bullets and slashed by steel. Yet his eyes were open. Some swore his headless body still fought on for a few steps, refusing to die. But what really happened that morning? Did Blackbeard's death seal his legend, or did something stranger occur in that foggy dawn? That is where our story begins. Blackbeard was not always born from fire and brimstone, though that is how legends would later paint him. Once upon a time, he was just Edward Teachsome. Old records spell it Thatcher young man from the port city of Bristol. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of steady gaze that could make a man pause before challenging him. No one then could have guessed that this same sailor would one day strike terror into the hearts of nations, that his very name would become synonymous with the devil himself in the bustling docks of Bristol. Edward grew up surrounded by the salt-stained air of ships bound for distant horizons, the smell of tar, the creak of masts, the shouts of merchants and sailors. This was his childhood symphony. He saw vessels leaving for the Caribbean, loaded with goods, and returning broken and battered, sometimes stripped bare by pirates, sometimes triumphant with wealth. By the time he was old enough to work a deck, Edward had already chosen his life. He would live and die on the sea. When the War of Spanish Succession broke out, the English crown needed men desperate, hungry men willing to fight the Spanish and French for king and country. Edward enlisted as a privateer. Privateering was little more than legalized piracy, a license to plunder so long as the loot belonged to England's enemies. Young Teach learned fast how to fire a musket in the roar of cannons, how to board a ship under grappling hooks and screaming steel, how to divide plunder with a steady hand so men would trust him. War molded him into something harder, sharper. But war's end. And when peace came, it left countless hardened killers adrift. The crown discarded them like broken tools, and men who had grown fat on plunder were expected to return to lives of poverty and obedience. Edward Teach was not made for such a fate. Somewhere in those restless years, he made a choice. He would not fade into obscurity. He would become more than a man. He would become a nightmare. The transformation was deliberate, almost theatrical. Teach discovered quickly that on the seas, reputation was worth more than cannons. A single ship with a terrifying name could make whole fleets surrender without firing a shot. And so, the legend of Blackbeard was born. He grew out his thick, wild beard until it covered most of his chest, black as tar and tangled like seaweed. Into this monstrous mane he braided hemp fuses, slow-burning cords he would light before battle. Picture it, a towering man, eyes gleaming with firelight, face wreathed in smoke, sparks hissing from his beard as though hell itself breathed through him. Sailors who saw him swore they faced not a man, but the devil risen from the deep. But this was no random madness. Blackbeard understood psychology as well as he understood steel. Fear broke men faster than bullets, and terror made enemies surrender before steel ever touched flesh. Ships gave up at the sight of him, their captains trembling at the thought of being flayed or slaughtered. The truth, whispered by those who served him, was far stranger. Blackbeard rarely killed prisoners. He didn't need to. His legend did the work for him. With his flagship, Queen Anne's Revenge, a captured French warship bristling with 40 cannons, Blackbeard built his reign. For 2 short years, he was the undisputed master of the American coast and the Caribbean. Governors cursed his name while secretly fearing his wrath. Merchants altered trade routes rather than risk his waters. Even Charleston, South Carolina, fell under his shadow when he blockaded its harbor, choking the city until it paid ransom. He didn't just raid ships, he bent entire colonies to his will. But behind every legend is a man, and Edward Teach was still human. His crew adored him, not because he was cruel, but because he understood men. He drank with them, laughed with them, shared spoils with fairness. His cruelty was almost always reserved for performance for outsiders, for those who needed to believe in the monster. Among his crew, he was captain, comrade, and sometimes friend. Yet even they whispered that he had made some pact, that no man could fight like him without help from darker powers. By 1718, Blackbeard's name was carved into the bones of the Atlantic. But with glory comes danger. The Crown, desperate to restore order to its colonies, began to crack down. The governors of Virginia and the Carolinas plotted, fearing that if Blackbeard continued, their fragile colonies would collapse under his shadow. Bounties were posted. The net began to tighten. It was then that Blackbeard retreated to Ocracoke Inlet, a quiet hideout among the shifting sands of North Carolina's Outer Banks. The place was a pirate's paradise, shallow waters, perfect for hiding, twisting channels that confounded pursuers, and a community of smugglers willing to turn a blind eye in exchange for gold. Here, Blackbeard anchored adventure, his smaller sloop after losing Queen Anne's Revenge on a sandbar. Some say he sought peace, perhaps even a kind of retirement. He married a local girl, his 14th, if the rumors are true, and drank heavily with friends and fellow outlaws. But peace does not come easily to men who live by the cutlass. That autumn night before his final battle, the sands of Ocracoke rang with laughter and music. Pirates feasted by roaring fires, barrels of rum cracked open, meat roasting on spits, fiddlers scraping their bows. Men danced, shouted, and fought in drunken joy. Blackbeard was at the center of it all, his booming voice rising above the chaos, his wild beard glowing faintly with the embers of his tricks. He drank deep, slapped shoulders, told tales of glory, and swore that no governor, no king, no navy could ever claim him. But when the fires burned low and the men collapsed in drunken stupor, Blackbeard walked alone by the shore. The moon hung pale over the water, silvering the waves. He stared out into the black horizon, and something heavy weighed in his chest. The night was too still, too silent. He could almost feel the noose tightening. The breath of death close behind. His quartermaster, Israel Hans, found him there. "You're quiet tonight, Captain," Hans said, his voice low. Blackbeard didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the horizon. "If the devil doesn't take me," he said, "then no man will." His voice was almost a whisper, but it carried a terrible certainty. Hans, hardened as he was, felt a shiver run through him. For all his bravado, for all his monstrous reputation, Blackbeard knew something the others didn't. He had cheated fate too many times. Death does not forgive so easily. And so, when dawn came, it brought more than sunlight. It brought Lieutenant Robert Maynard and the Royal Navy, sent by Governor Spotswood of Virginia. 2 sleek sloops, Jane and Ranger, armed and bristling with men, slid silently through the fog. Their mission was clear: kill Blackbeard at any cost. The demon of the seas had finally been cornered. The dawn broke cold and grey over Ocracoke Inlet, the horizon blurred by mist that clung to the sea like a shroud. For most men, that fog was ordinary, a passing veil of weather. But for Edward Teach, it was something more. It was a sign, a whisper from the deep that the end was coming. He stood on the deck of Adventure, boots planted firm on the damp planks, his great bulk silhouetted against the one light. His beard smoked faintly, the remnants of a fuse he had burned down to ash, as though to remind his crew and himself that he was more myth than man. Below deck, groans and curses drifted upward. The men had drunk too heavily the night before. The feast had left more than a few staggering or slumped over. But even half drunk, Blackbeard's crew were killers. They had followed him through storms, raids, and blockades. And though they joked of his pact with the devil, they clung to him like sailors clung to the mast in a hurricane. For if Blackbeard was marked by fate, then to stand beside him was to stand beside destiny itself. Yet fate had other players that morning. Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy was not a man of towering legend. He was no giant, no demon of the seas. He was, by all accounts, an ordinary officer, disciplined, ambitious, and cautious. But ambition has a sharp edge. When Governor Spotswood of Virginia called for Blackbeard's head, Maynard volunteered with a hunger in his eyes. To slay the devil himself, to bring home the head of the most feared pirate alive, that was the sort of deed that made careers. So Maynard set out with 2 sloops, Jane and Ranger, their decks crowded with soldiers and sailors. They carried no heavy cannons, only small arms, muskets, pistols, and cutlasses. But they had numbers, and more importantly, they had orders backed by a governor's gold. As they crept through the channels of the Outer Banks, Maynard kept his men silent. Every rope coiled neatly, every oarstroke measured. The fog was their ally, and hidden within it, they became shadows sliding closer to destiny. On Adventure, Blackbeard's lookout squinted through the haze. "Sails," he cried. The word cut through the groggy silence like a musket shot. Men stumbled to their feet, cursing and grabbing weapons. Blackbeard himself did not move at first. He inhaled the salt air, listening to the distant splash of oars, the faint creak of timbers. His lips curled into a grin. So he rumbled, The hounds have found the fox. He turned to his crew, his voice a thunderclap. To arms, lads. Today we dine in hell, or send these cowards to it. The men roared in answer, the fear of hangman's nooses giving way to the fever of battle. The Royal Navy's sloops emerged from the fog like ghosts, their sails taut, their bows cutting clean through the water. Maynard stood at the prow, eyes fixed on the black figure of Blackbeard across the inlet. He saw the sparks in the pirate's beard, the looming silhouette of a man larger than life, and for a heartbeat his breath caught. He had hunted a pirate, but what stared back at him looked like a monster born of nightmares. The first shots cracked the silence. Muskets spat fire, and the smell of powder stung the air. Blackbeard's men roared and answered with their own volley, the sound echoing across the water like thunder. Splinters flew as balls smashed into wood, and the inlet filled with shouts, smoke, and screams. Blackbeard bellowed orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. Run her aground. Close the distance. He knew the Navy's advantage lay in numbers and guns. To even the odds, he needed blood spilled face to face. He needed steel to meet steel. As adventures surged forward, Maynard gave his own command. His ships split, flanking the pirate sloop, their muskets raining fire. Men fell on both sides, tumbling into the bloodied water. Still, Blackbeard grinned, his cutlass gleaming in the mist. He seemed to grow larger in the smoke, his laughter carrying even over the roar of gunfire. The pirates fought with desperation, their muskets blazing, their pistols flashing in the gloom. But the Navy pressed hard, their discipline steady, their volleys relentless. Each moment, the gap closed, then came the crash. Adventure rammed against Jane, grappling hooks biting into her rails. The ships locked together like beasts in combat, their decks inches apart. For a moment, there was silence, the terrible, expectant hush before a storm breaks. Blackbeard stepped forward, cutlass in one hand, pistol in the other, eyes burning like coals, bored. He roared. The pirates surged across the gap, shrieking, cursing, steel flashing in their fists. The clash was instant, brutal. Cutlasses rang, pistols fired, point blank. Men screamed as blades bit into flesh. The decks became a slaughterhouse. Smoke thickened, stinging eyes and choking throats, and through it all Blackbeard moved like a force of nature. He struck down one man, then another, his laughter rolling like thunder. Maynard's men faltered under the ferocity. They had come to slay a pirate, but what they faced was a whirlwind of fury and smoke. Blackbeard seemed untouchable, his massive frame shrugging off blows, his eyes gleaming with something unearthly. A musket ball grazed his shoulder. He did not flinch. A cutlass scraped his arm. He only laughed louder. He fought like a man who believed himself immortal. But Maynard was no fool. He saw that brute force would not win, and so he ordered a trick. He had kept half his men hidden below deck, crouched in silence as the battle raged above. When the pirates surged forward, Maynard shouted the signal. His hidden men burst upward, fresh and ready, their muskets aimed at the heart of the boarding party. The tide shifted in a heartbeat. Gunfire erupted, cutting pirates down where they stood. Blackbeard's men, already bloodied, staggered under the fresh assault. For the first time, the grin slipped from the pirate's face. Still, he did not falter. He pushed forward, bellowing, cutting through Maynard's line like a man possessed. He and Maynard locked eyes across the chaos, the devil and the hunter. Fate had drawn its lines. And so the battle for Blackbeard's soul began. The deck of Jane had become a furnace of smoke, blood, and iron. The screech of cutlass on cutlass rang out like sparks striking an anvil, while muskets cracked point blank, tearing men off their feet. The cries of the wounded mixed with the roar of the living, a cacophony so loud it drowned out even the crash of the waves. This was no ordered naval skirmish, it was a melee, savage and personal, where survival came down to the strength of a man's arm and the steel in his heart. At the center of it stood Blackbeard. His sheer presence dominated the chaos. With every swing of his cutlass, he carved through the tide of soldiers. His massive frame silhouetted by the smoke, beard smoldering like a living torch. Sparks spat from the fuses braided in his hair, turning his face into a vision of hell itself. He laughed as he fought, a booming, guttural sound that chilled even the bravest Royal Navy sailors. To them, it seemed the devil himself had come aboard. Down with the dogs. Blackbeard bellowed, his cutlass hacking through the musket barrel of a soldier who dared thrust at him. His pistol roared a heartbeat later, the blast catching another man square in the chest and hurling him back against the mast. The men around him recoiled, shaken by his fury. But Robert Maynard did not retreat. He pressed forward through the blood and smoke, his sword drawn, his eyes fixed on the giant pirate. He was no fool. He knew his men looked to him for courage. If he faltered, if he wavered even for a moment, the line would break. So he advanced, teeth clenched, every nerve taut. The two men were opposites Maynard, lean and disciplined, trained by years of naval order. Blackbeard, massive and wild, a storm given flesh. Their collision was inevitable, as if the battle itself was nothing more than a stage set for their duel. The first clash was like thunder. Steel rang against steel, Maynard's blade meeting Blackbeard's cutlass with a shower of sparks. The impact jarred Maynard's arm, but he held firm. Blackbeard grinned, his eyes alight. So, the hound comes for the wolf, the pirate growled. I come for your head, Maynard spat. Driving forward, their blades danced in the smoke, swift and brutal. Maynard fought with precision, striking high, low, pressing with disciplined thrusts. Blackbeard countered with raw power, his strikes heavy enough to split bone, his footwork unorthodox, wild but effective. The men around them gave way, clearing a circle as if some primal instinct told them this was no ordinary fight. A pistol cracked beside them. A musket fired into the mailer butt. Neither combatant flinched. They were locked in their own world, steel ringing, breath ragged, faces inches apart. Blackbeard feinted left, then swung with a backhand so vicious it nearly tore Maynard's sword from his grip. Maynard staggered, his boots sliding in blood, but he recovered, lunging forward with a thrust that grazed the pirate's ribs. Blackbeard snarled, the grin replaced by a flash of pain and fury. You'll bleed for that, he growled, and bleed he did, but he did not fall. If anything, the wounds seemed to enrage him further. He surged forward, driving Maynard back with a storm of blows. The deck shook under his assault, each strike hammering like a blacksmith at his forge. Maynard blocked, parried, dodged, but sweat slicked his grip, and fatigue dragged at his limbs. Around them, the battle raged. Pirates fought like cornered beasts, knowing capture meant the noose. Maynard's hidden reserves of men pressed hard, muskets firing into the melee, cutlasses flashing. One pirate tried to leap across the deck to escape, only to be dragged down by 3 sailors who stabbed him mercilessly. Another, bellowing like a madman, fought with 2 pistols until both clicked empty, then swung them as clubs before being run through, Still, Blackbeard held the center, unbroken. He fired another pistol at point-blank range, the flash singeing Maynard's sleeve as the ball tore past. With a roar, he flung the empty weapon aside and swung his cutlass in a deadly arc. Maynard ducked, feeling the blade shear through his hat, the heat of the strike grazing his scalp. He countered with a thrust aimed at Blackbeard's belly, but the pirate caught the blade on his cutlass, twisting it away with brute strength. For a moment, their faces were close, their breaths mingling. Blackbeard's eyes burned like coals, his teeth bared in a savage grin. "You're a brave one," he said, almost admiring. "But bravery won't save you." Maynard snarled and shoved forward, their swords grinding together. "It will kill you." A sudden shout rose from the crew. One of Maynard's sailors, seizing his chance, fired a musket into Blackbeard's back. The ball struck, tearing into flesh, but the pirate did not fall. He staggered, roared, then swung wildly, cutting the shooter nearly in half with a single stroke. The sight froze men in their tracks. How could he still be standing? Blood poured from his wounds, yet he fought on. Maynard realized with a chill that the stories might be true. The man seemed unkillable, driven by some infernal force. Each wound only made him more monstrous, his laughter more terrible. Still, wounds take their toll, even on legends. His movements slowed, just enough for Maynard to see an opening. He struck, blade slicing across Blackbeard's shoulder. The pirate bellowed, the sound echoing across the inlet. The duel had reached its climax. Both men, bloodied and exhausted, circled warily. The smoke curled around them, the cries of dying men fading into a dull roar. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to two figures locked in mortal combat. Then Blackbeard lunged. Maynard met him. Their blades clashed one final time, the impact ringing like a bell of doom. And in that moment, both men knew only one would leave the deck alive. The battle had reached a fever pitch. Smoke rolled across the deck in choking clouds, gunpowder stung every breath, and the screams of the dying turned the inlet into an echo chamber of carnage. Men slipped in blood-slick planks. Blades clanged like clashing bells, and through the madness, two titans refused to yield, Blackbeard and Robert Maynard. The pirate was a vision of fury, his great form drenched in blood, some of it his own, most of it not. The fuses in his beard had burned low, spitting embers into his wild eyes. Each spark lit his face with a demonic glow, as though hell itself had chosen him as its champion. Though pistol balls had pierced his flesh and cutlasses carved his skin, he fought on, laughing, snarling, roaring like a beast that no mortal hand could slay. Maynard pressed forward, his blade flashing in desperate arcs. Sweat dripped from his brow, his arms screamed with fatigue, but he did not falter. He had sworn to take Blackbeard's head, and in that oath he found his strength. Each strike was measured, calculated not the wild fury of the pirate, but the cold determination of a man who knew history was watching. Their duel had drawn every eye. Around them, pirates and sailors clashed, but all glanced at the struggle at the center of the deck. Men paused mid-fight to gape as Blackbeard bellowed and Maynard countered, their blades sparking in the gloom. It was as though time itself had narrowed to this one contest, devil against hunter, chaos against order. Blackbeard swung with a force that would have shattered a lesser man. Maynard caught the blow, the impact rattling his bones. The pirate's grin widened, blood running down his teeth. "You're tiring, little man," he sneered. "And you're bleeding out," Maynard shot back, driving his sword into Blackbeard's side. The steel sank deep. The pirate roared, But instead of falling, he staggered forward, trapping Maynard's blade in his flesh. He swung his pistol, empty but still deadly, and smashed it against Maynard's skull. The lieutenant reeled, stars exploding in his vision, but somehow kept his feet. The fight dragged on, brutal and relentless. Blackbeard had been shot 5 times, cut more than 20. Yet still he came, each wound fueling his fury. His men were falling all around him, pirates, cut down by disciplined volleys, stabbed through the heart, tossed overboard into the blood-red sea. But the captain fought on, as though he alone could defy the tide. Finally, Maynard saw his chance. Blackbeard swung wide, overcommitting in his rage. The lieutenant ducked beneath the arc and drove his blade upward, straight through the pirate's throat. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Blackbeard staggered, his eyes widening, blood bubbling from his mouth. He looked down at the blade protruding from his neck, then up at Maynard, and then he laughed. A wet, gurgling laugh, terrible in its defiance. With a final burst of strength, he raised his cutlass high. Maynard braced for the killing blow, but it never came. The pirate's arm faltered, the cutlass slipping from his grip. His great frame trembled, then crashed to the deck with the force of a felled oak. The sound silenced the battlefield. Men froze where they stood, staring at the fallen figure. The devil of the seas lay dying at their feet. But even in death, Blackbeard was not done. His chest heaved, blood pumping from his wounds, but his eyes those burning. Coal-bright eyes remained fixed on Maynard. He tried to rise, clawing at the planks with bloodied hands, dragging himself forward inch by inch. Sailors backed away in terror, some crossing themselves, others whispering prayers. They had heard the tales that Blackbeard could not die like other men, that his body would fight on even after his head was gone. And in that moment, it seemed true. "Devil," one soldier whispered, his voice trembling. "Shoot him again." Another cried. Muskets fired, balls thudding into the pirate's back. He jerked with each impact, but kept crawling, his eyes never leaving Maynard. Maynard himself felt a chill settle in his bones. The man should have been dead 10 times over. Yet still he came, dragging himself through blood and smoke like some revenant. For a terrible moment, Maynard wondered if he had not, in fact, struck down a man. But something else entirely. At last, Maynard raised his sword and, with a shout, brought it down. The blade carved deep across Blackbeard's neck. Blood sprayed in a crimson arc. The pirate convulsed, then stilled. Silence fell. The men stared at the body, waiting. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, slowly, it became clear. The demon was gone. Edward Teach, Blackbeard, the scourge of the seas, was dead. The crew erupted in cheers and cries of relief. The pirates still alive threw down their arms, surrendering as the reality of their captain's death crushed them. Maynard stood over the corpse, chest heaving, his sword dripping with blood. He had done it. He had slain the devil himself. But even then, the terror lingered. Sailors whispered of how many bullets and cuts it had taken to bring him down. 5 shots, 20 wounds, and still he fought until the end. Some swore that as his blood spilled across the planks, it smoked like fire on water. Others claimed his eyes still gleamed, faintly even as his body grew cold. And when Maynard gave the order, when they severed Blackbeard's head from his shoulders and hoisted it high on the bowsprit of Jane, the men cheered, yes, but with unease. For they knew they had not killed a man. They had killed a legend. But legends have a way of lingering. That night, as the battle's smoke cleared and the bodies were tossed into the sea, some swore they saw a shadow move beneath the waves. Some swore the headless body swam circles around the ships before sinking into the deep. And others, in the years that followed, swore they heard laughter on the wind when storms lashed the Carolina coast. Blackbeard was dead. But was he gone? The morning after the battle at Ocracoke, the sea was calm again. To calm, where hours before the inlet had been an inferno of smoke and screams. Now the water lapped gently against the shattered hulls, as if the ocean itself had already washed away the memory of blood. But no man on Robert Maynard's ships would ever forget. Blackbeard was dead door, so they told themselves. His head, severed from his shoulders, swung gruesomely from the bowsprit of Jane. It was meant as proof, a warning to all who dared raise the black flag. But as it dangled there, dripping seawater and blood, some swore its eyes still gleamed faintly in the morning light. Sailors looked away quickly, muttering prayers. It is one thing to kill a man. It is another to kill a legend. The body, stripped and weighted, was tossed into the sea. For a moment, it sank without fuss, bubbles breaking the surface. Then, as the waves calmed, a ripple circled outward, strange, deliberate, like the turning of something alive beneath the water. One sailor crossed himself. Another swore he saw the body move, swimming silently around the ship before vanishing into the depths. Maynard dismissed such talk as rummaged fancy, but in his heart he wondered. The voyage back to Virginia was long and heavy. The men were victorious. Yes, they had slain the terror of the seas. Yet unease haunted them. Strange things began to happen aboard Jane. A sudden storm would rise out of clear skies, lashing the sails and splitting spars. At night, men claimed to hear footsteps on deck when no one walked. The creak of the planks carried a rhythm to steady, to purposeful, as though a phantom paced the ship. Some swore they heard laughter low, gurgling, wet as if it rose from beneath the waves. One night, a young sailor screamed that he had seen a headless figure climbing the rigging. Lanterns were lit. Men rushed forward, but nothing was there. The lookout swore he saw a black shadow swimming alongside the ship in the moonlight, moving faster than any shark. And then, the strangest of all, the head of Blackbeard, swinging on the bowsprit, seemed at times to smile. The lips curled faintly, mockingly, as though the pirates still mocked them from beyond the grave. When they reached the port of Hampton, the gruesome trophy was displayed with triumph. Maynard presented the head to Governor Spotswood, who mounted it on a pike at the mouth of the harbor. There it stood, blackened by sun and salt, a warning to all who passed. This is the fate of pirates. For months, the sight greeted every ship that entered, a silent sentinel of victory. But whispers spread. Sailors claimed that at night the head would grin wider, or that its lips moved, mouthing curses. Some claimed the eyes glowed faintly in moonlight, watching. The legend grew. Locals swore the waters around Ocracoke were cursed after that day. Fishermen whispered of strange currents, of phantom lights in the fog, of voices calling from beneath the waves. More than once, a storm would lash the Carolina coast, and in the howl of the wind, men swore they heard laughter, Blackbeard's laughter, rolling like thunder across the sea. And then came the stories of the ghost. They called him the Headless Pirate. Sailors swore that on nights when the fog was thick, they saw a massive figure walking the shorelines of Ocracoke, lantern in hand, searching, always searching. Some said he was looking for his head. Others whispered he sought vengeance against those who betrayed him. Ships unlucky enough to anchor near the inlet reported strange noises, chains dragging across the deck, heavy boots stomping in the dark, the flicker of sparks in the mist as if his burning beard still smouldered. Even Maynard himself was not free of the curse. Though he had won glory, his career did not soar as he had hoped. Whispers clung to him that he had used dishonorable tricks, that he had needed overwhelming numbers to bring down one man. And worse, some claimed Blackbeard haunted him. Servants in his home swore the lieutenant would wake in the night, screaming of glowing eyes and smoke. He never admitted such fears publicly, but he died years later with little honor to his name. The man who killed Blackbeard never truly escaped him, yet the strangest part is this: some swore Blackbeard never truly died at all. Sailors who passed Ocracoke decades later told of hearing cannon fire echoing from nowhere, or seeing a phantom ship glide silently through the fog, its captain a shadow with a flaming beard. In taverns, old sea dogs would lean close, voices low, swearing that the pirates still roamed the waters, searching for a fight, laughing in storms. And so the legend grew. Children in the Carolinas would whisper it on stormy nights. Don't go near the water, or Blackbeard will take you. Fishermen poured rum into the sea as an offering, hoping to appease the ghost. And every ship that passed the inlet felt the weight of unseen eyes. Even now, some say, if you stand on the sands of Ocracoke at night, when the fog rolls thick and the wind dies, you will hear footsteps behind you, heavy, deliberate. And if you dare to look back, you might see him, a massive figure, headless, beard aflame, still searching, still laughing. Blackbeard is gone, but the sea remembers, and maybe, just maybe, the devil of the seas never truly left. They thought they killed him with 5 bullets and 20 cuts. They thought severing his head ended his reign, but sailors still whisper of laughter in storms and shadows in the fog. Some say the curse of Blackbeard is real, that his body still walks the seabed, searching. And maybe, the next time a hurricane lashes the Carolina coast, listen closely to the wind. You just might hear him. If you thought this tale was wild, wait until you hear the next untold pirate story, the cursed treasure of Captain Kidd, and why men are still dying to find it.